Welcome back to our conversation with James McCammett, the Chief Digital Transformation Officer for Customs and Border Protection, Dave Raley, the CX Digital Program Manager for the Marine Corps Community Services, and Marianne Monroe, the Managing Director of the CX Accelerator at Maximus. Everyone, let's pick up where we left our conversation, really on this data piece of things. Marianne, can you tell me a little bit more about what ultimately the metrics that matter for agencies are, what they should do to keep on top of that data to make sure they're heading in the right direction?
Certainly. Well, I'll begin by saying, metrics need to be measurable and meaningful. And we talked a little bit about that in our former segment, but I think that metrics are telling the story and some of the story, but as we evolve in providing government services, even in our own government contracting world at Maximus, there's work to be done, and there is a lot of data. I think it's important to focus on what are we driving in terms of outcomes, and being able to tell that story and really speak to the ROI. James spoke to that previously, as did Dave, but what we're really doing is focusing on driving those outcomes, understanding the metrics that matter with our agency partners, and driving towards those mission outcomes. So the metrics that a lot of the agencies that we are serving and the end customers are focused on efficiency and being able to deliver efficient and effective services in a timely manner. And really, we want to move our agency partners away from just thinking about outputs and how many forms were processed or how many calls or interactions were handled, but how are we moving the needle on all of that great work on improving the outcomes for the agency and for the customers we serve on their behalf? So how are we improving health outcomes through our health services delivery programs that we have? How are we impacting the lives of veterans in the programs where we are providing medical disability examinations? And what are we learning from the data that not only drives the results, the results of the everyday and the efficiency and effectiveness of those programs, but how are we then informing the agencies on policy decisions or directives that might be important for them to consider or change? And how is that data that we're learning being integrated back into driving those really larger outcome, mission-oriented outcomes for our agencies?
Dave, you were saying how your agency is really focused on kind of really the personas of these Marines, these service members, anticipating what needs they might have and then meeting them where they are in delivering those services. Going back to the data piece of things, how are you guys using the data, leveraging the data as a strategic asset to do just that?
Yes, so let me share maybe on two aspects. So I want to talk about that customer experience and then how do we measure those. And I love this. I don't think enough people talk about outcomes in general, especially inside the government, of being outcome. It's not whether you did the process or did the things or worked through the process, but are you achieving anything? So from a customer experience perspective, as an organization within the Marine Corps that's supporting quality of life, but also charging for the services that we provide, we have we've now kind of reshaped internally in our organization. When we think of making a business case, we actually don't make business case. We call them an M3 case. And we evaluate, is the service or the offering we're providing meeting a Marine need? Does it support the Marine Corps' mission? And then lastly, is it something that our organization can actually do sustainably? So we think about those things as the way we frame it. And then the results we're looking to achieve from that framework is we measure it traditionally like a retailer or another service provider does. Is there revenue being generated? Are you doing those things? The other metric that we are looking at now is, how is this reducing our cost to serve? Like, can we do this in a much more efficient way that provides that at a lower cost to our organization that allows us to then provide additional services or expand or grow in that area? And then lastly, the most important measurement, and it's a little harder to measure, but it's the most important thing to us as a purpose-driven organization that thinks about how do we reduce friction in Marines' lives, is are we maintaining relevancy and increasing relevancy with that community? Because they have other choices. They can go outside the gate, take advantage of other retail services, other programs and things like that. So we have to look at that from a relevancy perspective. And that all ties back to that M3 case. And then kind of a hard pivot into the technology side, this goes back to some of the stuff Marianne was talking about specifically around outcomes, is how do we measure, and in our case, the top line is we have to be able to securely and quickly deliver IT capabilities that enable mission at the speed of relevance. So there's a lot of at the speed of operations, at the speed of fill in the X, but we think in terms of speed of relevance specifically across the DoD. And that relevance goes back to some of those metrics I just shared from the customer experience perspective. So some of the things that we've done with building our IL4 SCA compliant landing zone, the software factory with the CI/CD pipelines, our ability to get authorizations inside 30 days. All of those things are helping us speed the time to deliver on capability that supports that overall customer mission. So we're talking about going from that real 4 or 5 year acquisition, waterfall, legacy compliance approach to, for containerized workloads, build and deliver same day with a continuous authorization. So that's a fairly big, like kind of months into minutes type of approach. So those are the metrics I look at on the technology side, is how can we crash and eliminate orders of magnitude faster to actually deliver capability.
I think it's fascinating to hear you say that, Dave, because both you and James have said some version of the private sector setting the higher bar for services in government, and yet we've heard this mantra for so long of like the federal government doesn't choose its customers, right? I mean, if you want to move people and goods into this country, there's only one show in town, so to speak. There's no alternative. Same thing with your agency, Dave. But and yet there are pressures. There's a bar being set that you guys are rising to the occasion to. And I just wonder, James, if you could maybe speak to that on your own agency over at CBP, that driving pressure for you guys to do better, faster, cheaper, more efficiently.
Well, and I think that to add to the point of the outcomes and outputs, right? The outcome is we're focused on because it is securely facilitating someone entering the country and the goods and services. The pressure aspect is truly to using data as a barometer. We use it as a detector at CBP to determine if there's anomalies, and I've mentioned that, but also as a barometer of what we can do to improve further. So in the CBPX, as we say, customer CBP Experience Division, CBPX, to look at both internally and externally, we look at the validity of the need for information that we collect. So in our statutory requirements, that just the sheer data to put forward for a regulation and information requested. We look at deleting parts of processes that we don't need anymore because they might have become outdated or outmoded. Why do you ask this now? For example, one that we use in our CBP online application, CBP Home, is the I-94. So if you remember, if you flew into the United States for many years, you would fill out the form 30 minutes before the flight attendants are wandering, make sure, did anybody need a pen? Here you go. Well, it's information that was needed, but we found over time that in fact, you don't have to put it on paper. We can because most of the time it was a quick check. There wasn't a blip, so you can put this now on the application. You can still file the information, and it facilitates the movement through. That's being responsive to the needs and recognizing the needs of the traveling public. At the same time, we recognize probably most would like to minimize their experience with CBP, much as they should like us. And so they want to, we want to maximize that experience and minimize their amount of time. But maximizing efficiency never compromises national security.
Right.
And so that it's a balance. It's more of a tension point to try to integrate those two, and also measure the impact of technology solutions on what we're offering. I'd say we want to be cautious that we don't find the next best idea to save time, but it's going to take 6 months or a year of more time to save time. Maybe, but let's be careful about that because it may impact both the public and our people. One of the examples of something that we've done in response is, for example, using robotic process automation to respond to routine congressional inquiries on global entry applications. So that may sound okay, but it was costing a lot of time for our employees in the Congressional Affairs team to go manually into the system and check these case inquiries. We were able to put an RPA in place that now auto takes the response, checks it, verifies, has an input reply. It's obviously quality checked. But now you have the same officer in Congressional Affairs can now look at that at a quality check. So you're moving much quicker. The data is much more secure in checking. And so it's really seeking how we can eliminate, again, administrative burdens, enhance the performance, respond to the needs, and constantly reevaluating this. This is an aspect where we're very excited about the continuing use of AI, is as an evaluator, right? As it's looking across the process and saying, have you considered this change? And now we can make it, and now we can test it, and now we can evaluate it. And yet our human-centered design remains at the center. We need our officers and agents and employees to do what they uniquely can do. This allows that. And at the same time, the traveler, the person who interacts with CBP, should genuinely feel like they are heard, seen, responded to.
Yeah.
That has all its implications in a law enforcement agency too. And you walk away saying, oh, I understand why you asked me that. I get it. And it was quick, and it was secure, and I feel better because I think everyone who enters the country wants to know that there's a security framework where they feel comfortable they've been seen, and that everyone entering the country is who they should be, right, and identified.
One of the things I think is so important about what you're saying, James, is the importance of a feedback data-driven approach and how to apply that using data, but it's a continuous process. And you learn so much from the people who are working through that process that you can then go back, fine tune and hone. And there's so many examples that both of you have given that I just think it's really important that when we're thinking about customer experience, that we never forget that continuous feedback loop is so important to the process of improving experiences, no matter what we're doing and for whom.
Right. When someone says, why don't you do X and Y, or why do you?
Right.
We should hope that our response is, good question, maybe the response is X, Y, and Z. It's not a defensive posture.
That's right.
We should be looking at it. I feel like the guiding mantra of putting this back to free up time, back to mission for our employees, and time back to the experience of those who are walking through the airports and shipping goods. That's what this does in response, right?
That's right.
And that continuous feedback loop.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Dave, just to give you an opportunity to jump in here, can you give us an example of feedback that's been incorporated into improvements that you guys are making?
Well, specifically, so I talked a little bit about this earlier, about our process and journey around uncovering the unmet needs of Marines using ethnography, having deep, long form interviews with Marines across the globe, understanding. And the interesting way that we looked at it was really deeply understanding who they are, what motivates them, how do they work, what is life like inside the Marine Corps, what do you like about it, what do you not like about it, what motivates you, and feeling how we can fit ourselves into their life and help them from that perspective versus, hey, come use our service and tell me more about whether you didn't like the color of the store experience or whatever. But first of all, like understanding that. And that has led us to make a lot of changes in the way that we deliver our services and plan a lot more changes in that. So that's and we continue to do additional market research, both qualitative and quantitative, continue to understand that, and then we measure those other metrics I mentioned earlier, and that's the feedback loop that we're trying to create. The other area on the technology side, so I find myself kind of in this dual mindset when we're having this discussion around the CX, but then also the underlying technology. The big parts of the advancements in how we were able to achieve some of the outcomes I mentioned a few minutes ago is really around applying that DevOps, Agile, Lean methodology, and at the core of that is that drive towards having the ability to visualize work in progress, reduce your queues and your delays, and get those consistent feedback loops. So I'll give you a really granular example of that. So in a continuous integration, continuous delivery technology pipeline, so a software factory, one of the things that we do is government organizations typically with their developers and people the software engineers would do these long cycle times of building out capability, and then they would pitch it over the fence to the cyber team to review the work that they've done and then either prove it or most often kick it back and say it failed and here's all the issues. And then you get in this multiple month long cycle of trying to build that capability out. Well, we bake the security and risk tolerances into the pipeline. So when a developer builds code and tries to drop it into the pipeline, it hits that gate and they get feedback within minutes. And so we've shifted left all the way to the left. Security is being done by the developer. And they're actually, I saw it live time. We onboarded one of our internal teams into our software factory in the last couple of months. And when they came on board, they were trying to develop in the old way, and they learned within, like, it took a couple of weeks of doing it, but we saw people mature and advance in their capability from a developer perspective. In a matter of weeks, they moved decades forward because they got that instant feedback. So they put the code in, there was a failure, there was an explanation for the failure, they learned, next time they didn't do it that way. So I think there's two places where you get that feedback loops. I think almost in any area are really important. And I've heard some terms in the military, in particular Marines, really struggle with this idea of fail fast, because I know industry uses that term. And really what we mean by that is be willing to try and experiment and learn from that and then change. But really that's the continuous learning that I think has been, what I'm sure, James, based on our interaction here, I'm sure that the hairs on your neck stand up when somebody starts to say, because we've always done, and I'm like, stop,
Right.
don't say that. I know there's a problem when that's your explanation for whatever it is. So,
Academically good to know.
yes.
Okay, right.
But the point there that I think is really important to understand is we must embrace learning in whatever its form is, whether it's getting feedback from the way that travelers are behaving, in your case, because they see something, the way Marines are interacting with us and something didn't work. Be curious, seek to learn and seek to understand and interpret that, as opposed, and I really like, James, what you talked about is, I think intuitively for most people, it's you tend to be defensive. You did something for a reason, so somebody challenges you and you want to be defensive. You've got to, I was talking with a friend this morning and he was talking about, like, approach problems with your hands out and your palms up, right? Like, be willing to learn, right?
Yeah.
And don't be like thinking you've got it all figured out. And it's a challenge. A challenge for me individually, but I think organizationally, across my organization and more broadly in the government side, it's very easy to get kind of trapped in, this is the way it is. No, don't try to explain industry. Don't try to help me. This is the way it works. It's like, stop, be open to learning, because there's a lot more ways to do it faster out there.
Yeah.
That's well said. I think another example for us that popped to mind on it is also when the perspective might be, we're kind of the only path you have. So we have these steps, and this is what you should do. And so trying to pivot that to say, yes, there's some core responsibilities, but even if someone's using your services at a high volume, it doesn't mean you shouldn't try to redirect and look at that in a fresh eyes.
That's right.
And so one example on Global Entry is with Global Entry is, last year, well, FY24, we had about 8.8 million visitors to our website for Global Entry. So our other websites, other volumes and numbers. And about 158 million to our Trusted Traveler public-facing website, which is larger than Global Entry. Well, millions of people using it, right? We also recognize, and with our CBPX team inside the CDTO, our work, they partnered with our Office of Field Operations, our OIT, and looked at what can we do to improve using usability testing. It's working because people are coming. They're also frustrated. We hear it, and they're trying to find fill in the blank. Let's run the usability testing. So Janet Pence on my team, who heads that division, dove deep with our operators, and that's part of the building the relationships too, right? Is the hands open. I love that example, right? It's like, just hold on, don't cross your arms. Let's try to work this. And they were very willing to do so. And so the CBPX team listens to the Global Entry applicants and our own officers, made a great number of changes to the website, and we've been getting a lot of good feedback on that. That's also a plug. If you've not applied for a Global Entry, try out the website. But it was an example of where volume alone doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't make changes, right? It's great, lots of users. How can we improve this experience even more? And then that builds in spaces where we still have changes to be made. So, okay, this experience has been great. I might be frustrated here, but maybe there's a little bit more willingness to have a good affinity towards the CBP work because you've had these other positive experiences. So it's constantly listening and evolving, right, as you said.
Constant listening, learning, and applying what we've learned to make improvements.
Right.
You know, that has to be built into our process. It doesn't end.
Right.
And I think the other piece around this conversation that's really important is there's many ways to listen. and to look at data and review data. And you've both brought out the importance of actually seeking the feedback from the people who are doing the work or who are in the field as such an important part of the feedback, the listening, and the learning because they're doing the work every day.
That's right. They're the front line.
That's right.
And we say it for CBP, we have our frontline officers and agents, the law enforcement. We also have our support team, who are really the front line for the front line. But they're the ones that are the first barometer.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned with our grassroots developers or innovators, almost 1,400 people who are just doing this when they see changes in needs, we want to keep building on that so that we can guarantee the better delivery of the mission. But listening is so key. It's that ability to do that in the different mannerisms will result in concrete delivery. And
So this listening piece, this was actually a fairly not heated, but very robust debate internally with our executive team only in the last few weeks. I don't know how this is across other government agencies. I can make an assumption. Doing actual surveys and getting them approved in that process and is very, very time consuming. Like it could be like multiple years to get approval just to do a simple survey. There's O&B regulations related to this. There's privacy things, and then within each individual agency and components, there's lots of rules and restrictions, the tools you can do, the methods. And candidly, I don't think that surveys are actually as beneficial as that much effort. There's lots of passive ways to listen.
Absolutely.
How are people reacting? James, I'm sure you're doing this already. We do. How are people reacting in a digital space? What are they consuming, not consuming? How are they behaving? And this goes all the way back to that personalization thing. If you can pour in that learning and connect it with the personalization, that's where it gets really dynamic. But for us, it's now exploring what are all the ways that we can passively listen and understand and gather information around customer behavior so that we can improve the experience and reduce friction.
And our technology is enabling us in lots of newer ways that agencies are actually embracing around listening to sentiment and understanding the analytics around what people are saying and experiencing with the agency, with the program or the service, and using these forms of data that are both qualitative and quantitative to inform us of improvements that need to be made, or even further, trends that are happening that we are regularly bringing back to our agency partners to inform them on trends that matter or things that they might consider in terms of how policies are working or not working. I'll give you an example. In one of our public health programs, we've been able to inform the agency partners on things far beyond the topic at hand in terms of delivering health information to the public around particular topics. In this example, it was around topics in the pandemic. And we were able to move beyond the transaction and the interaction with the public to say, here are some trends that we're hearing that are informing us on how perhaps you can communicate better or make your information easier to understand on your website and make it easier for people to get what they need quickly, seamlessly, without friction. So, it's going back to that conversation we've had today around driving to those mission outcomes that are really important for the agency beyond the transactional reactive level, but pushing the boundaries to be proactive and predictive in how we partner together and serve the business and the people.
Very much so. I think you were mentioning one of the methods we found, the usability testing, right? Not just how do you feel about it, but where can you find this on the website, and which helped us in transforming the Global Entry website. Another for us, again related to Global Entry, was if you have Global Entry, you know that we use kiosks for a long time. You come up with the passport in, check your picture, great. We've now evolved to facial recognition in several of our airports where you can just keep walking. And that was in response to, well, if you already know me, why do I need to stop, start? And seeing that go live in both a pilot and then eventually moving and watching people as they strolled along, questioning, like, wait, do I need to, I just waited. No, you can keep moving, right? And so those types, it's one example, but it's that listening to people's needs of saying, well, yeah, you're right. Why shouldn't you be able to move as fast as possible? And but with security, with facilitation, we can still meet our core mission needs and those outcomes by deriving on the best of the technologies and solutions, but also the best for our people.
All right, fantastic conversation, everyone. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thanks again to everyone who contributed to our conversation here. James McCammett, the Chief Digital Transformation Officer for Customs and Border Protection, Dave Raley, the CX Digital Program Manager for the Marine Corps Community Services, and Marianne Monroe, the Managing Director of the CX Accelerator at Maximus. I'm Jory Heckman, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the CX Exchange.